My stepmother tried to pave over my mother's memory, starting with her beloved rose garden, but she didn't realize my mother had planted a seed of her own, one that would bring their entire world crashing down. The last thing my mother ever planted was a rose bush, a deep crimson variety called Mr. Lincoln. She'd put it right under my bedroom window so its perfume would drift in on summer nights. For the 2 years after she was gone, tending to that garden was the only way I could feel close to her. It was my sanctuary, a living, breathing memory of the woman who had been my entire world. And it was the one thing my stepmother, Carol, couldn't stand. Carol had swept into our lives like a tornado of beige paint and minimalist furniture 6 months after Mom's funeral. My father, lost in his grief, had clung to her like a life raft. I tried to understand. I really did. But every time I saw her putting one of my mom's photo albums into a box in the attic, or heard her call my father honey in the kitchen my mom had designed, a cold knot of resentment would tighten in my stomach. She saw the garden as the final frontier in her campaign to erase every trace of her predecessor. "It's so messy, David," I'd hear her whisper to my dad at night. "All those weeds, and the upkeep. We should just pave it over, put in a nice clean patio, some modern water feature maybe." Each suggestion was a dagger to my heart. That garden wasn't messy. It was vibrant and wild, just like my mom. I spent every weekend weeding, pruning, and nurturing it. The Mr. Lincoln roses had never been more beautiful. The breaking point came on a Saturday morning. I woke up to the sound of a strange man's voice in the backyard. I looked out my window and saw Carol standing with a contractor, pointing directly at my mother's rose bush. My blood ran cold. I threw on a pair of jeans and flew down the stairs. "What's going on?" I asked, my voice trembling with a mixture of sleep and panic. Carol turned, a tight artificial smile plastered on her face. "Oh, good morning, sweetheart. Mr. Henderson is just giving us a quote for the new patio." "The new patio?" I looked from her to my dad, who was standing awkwardly by the back door, refusing to meet my eyes. "Dad, what is she talking about?" "Now, son," he started, wringing his hands. "We talked about this. The yard is a lot of work. Carol has some wonderful ideas to make it more manageable." "Manageable? You mean dead?" I stared at the contractor. "You're not touching a single thing in this garden, especially not that rose bush." Carol's smile vanished. "Excuse me. This is our house, and we will decide how the yard looks." "It was Mom's house first." The words were out before I could stop them. "And that was her rose bush. You have no right." Her face turned a blotchy, furious red. She took a step towards me, her voice dropping to a venomous hiss. "Your mother is gone. Do you understand me? She is not coming back. I am the woman of this house now, and I will not live in her shrine a moment longer." "It's not a shrine, it's a garden," I yelled back, tears starting to sting my eyes. I turned to my father, my last hope. "Dad, please don't let her do this. It's all I have left of her." My father looked torn. For a heart-stopping second, I saw a flicker of the man he used to be, the man who had loved my mother with every fiber of his being. He looked at the roses, then at Carol, whose eyes were boring into him, silently daring him to defy her. And then his shoulders slumped in defeat. "She's right, son," he mumbled, looking at the ground. "It's time to move on." The betrayal was so absolute, so profound, it stole the air from my lungs. "Move on?" I whispered, incredulous. "You want me to move on by letting her bulldoze Mom's memory?" That was it. That was the spark that lit the final inferno. Carol's face contorted with rage. "I knew it. I knew you'd never accept me. You and your precious mother, always looking down on me. I am sick of living with her ghost." She whirled on my father. "David, I can't do this anymore. It's him or me. You have to choose." My dad looked at me, his eyes pleading, but he said nothing. His silence was his answer. Carol's lips curled back in a triumphant sneer. She pointed a trembling finger at the door. "Get out!" she hissed. Then her voice rose to a full-blown shriek that echoed off the houses around us. "Get out of our house! Get out of our lives!" I stood there, frozen in shock, as my own father watched his new wife throw me out of the home I'd lived in my entire life. He didn't move. He didn't say a word to defend me. He just stood there as my world crumbled. I numbly walked past him, up to my room, and started throwing clothes into a backpack. He never came upstairs. 20 minutes later, I walked out the front door with a single bag, my keys left on the hall table. I didn't know where I was going. I had a few $100s saved from my part-time job, but that was it. As I stood on the curb, the full weight of my new reality crashed down on me. I was homeless. I was alone. My own father had chosen his new wife over me. I pulled out my phone, my hands shaking so badly I could barely dial. There was only one person I could think to call. My maternal grandmother answered on the second ring. "Hello, dear," she said, her voice warm and comforting. A sob broke from my throat. "Grandma," I choked out, they kicked me out." I explained everything through ragged breaths. The garden, the argument, Carol's ultimatum, my dad's silence. She listened patiently, without interrupting. When I was finished, the line was quiet for a long moment. I expected sympathy, maybe an offer to come stay with her. What I got instead was a voice that had turned from warm honey to pure steel. "He let her do that?" she said, her tone dangerously calm. "In your mother's house? That contemptible little woman." She took a deep breath. "All right, sweetie. Listen to me very carefully. You're going to get in a cab and come straight to my house. But on your way, I need you to do something for me. Do you remember the big oak desk in your dad's study? The one that was your mother's?" "Yeah," I sniffled, confused. "What about it?" "In the bottom left-hand drawer, there's a large manila envelope. It has Hale Property Trust written on the front. I need you to go back in there, get that envelope, and bring it to me. Don't let them see you and don't tell them what you're looking for. Can you do that for me?" I guess," I stammered. "Grandma, what is it? What's in that envelope?" There was another pause, and I could almost hear the grim smile forming on her face. "It's their eviction notice, dear," she said. "They just don't know it yet." My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it would break free. Going back. I had to go back. I ended the call with my grandmother and shoved my phone in my pocket, my mind racing. Carol and Dad were still in the backyard with the contractor. I could hear their muffled voices discussing stone pavers and outdoor kitchens. They thought I was gone for good. They were wrong. I crept around the side of the house, staying low beneath the windows. My breath hitched as I passed the garden. The contractor had pulled out a measuring tape, and Carol was gesturing wildly at the Mr. Lincoln roses, a look of grim satisfaction on her face. A fresh wave of rage washed over me, so potent it almost made me careless. I forced it down. Not yet. I had a mission. The window to the laundry room at the back of the house had a busted latch. Mom always meant to get it fixed, but never did. It was one of those little household quirks I knew by heart. My fingers, slick with nervous sweat, fumbled with the frame. It took 2 tries, but it slid open with a soft groan. I hoisted myself up and through, landing silently on the linoleum floor. The house was eerily quiet. It already felt alien, like a place I used to know. Dad's study was at the front of the house. I moved on silent feet, every creak of the floorboards a gunshot in the silence. I could smell Carol's cloying air freshener, some synthetic vanilla monstrosity that had replaced the scent of lemon polish and old books that had always defined this room. I paused at the doorway, listening. The voices from the garden were still there, a low murmur. I was safe for now. The desk was a magnificent piece of dark oak, solid and imposing. It had been my mother's pride and joy. I knelt and pulled at the bottom left-hand drawer. It was locked. Of course, it was locked. A hot spike of panic shot through me. What now? I couldn't just leave. I frantically started trying the other drawers. desk supplies, old bills, a half-empty bag of candy my dad tried to hide from Carol. Nothing. Then I remembered. Mom was always losing the tiny key for that drawer. She'd told me her secret hiding place once, laughing as she did. "Just in case of emergencies," she'd said. I reached under the lip of the desk, my fingers tracing the cool wood until they found a small piece of tape. Stuck to it was the tiny, ornate brass key. My mother, saving me one last time. My hand was trembling as I fit the key into the lock. It turned with a satisfying click. I pulled the drawer open. It was full of old files and photo negatives, but right on top, just as Grandma had said, was a thick manila envelope. In my mother's neat, elegant handwriting were the words, "Hale Property Trust." Hale, my mother's maiden name. I clutched it to my chest like a holy relic. I had it. I was just about to close the drawer when I heard the back door slide open. "I'm just grabbing a glass of water," I heard my dad say. "You want anything, honey?" My blood turned to ice. He was coming inside. The study was directly off the main hallway from the kitchen. If he even glanced in my direction, he would see me. There was nowhere to hide. My eyes darted around the room and landed on the heavy velvet curtains my mom had loved, the ones Carol had threatened to replace with sterile white blinds. I dove behind them, pressing myself flat against the wall, my heart trying to beat its way out of my chest. The envelope felt like it was burning a hole through my shirt. I heard his footsteps in the kitchen, the sound of the refrigerator opening, a glass clinking. "Please, just get your water and go back outside. Please, don't come in here." He started humming, a tuneless, nervous sound he always made when he was trying to convince himself everything was okay. His footsteps started moving again, not towards the back door, but toward the front of the house, towards the study. He walked right past the curtains, so close I could have reached out and touched him. I held my breath, squeezing my eyes shut. He stopped at the desk. I heard a drawer open. The top one, thank God, a rustle of paper. Then he sighed, a deep, weary sound that held a universe of regret and weakness. "It's for the best," he muttered to himself, a hollow mantra. "It's for the best." Then he turned and walked away, his footsteps retreating back to the kitchen, and finally the slide of the back door closing. I waited a full minute, my body rigid, before I dared to peek out. The hallway was empty. I didn't waste another second. I slipped out from behind the curtain, crept back to the laundry room, and wriggled out the window, not even daring to breathe until my feet were on the grass and I was sprinting down the street. The cab ride to my grandmother's was a blur. I sat in the back, clutching the envelope, my mind a whirlwind of confusion and fear, and a tiny, flickering flame of hope. When I arrived, Grandma was waiting on the porch. She wasn't crying or wringing her hands. Her face was set like granite, her eyes clear and sharp. She ushered me inside, sat me down at her kitchen table with a tall glass of iced tea, and took the envelope from my trembling hands. "Good boy," she said, her voice firm. She slid it open with a letter opener, her movements precise and deliberate. She pulled out a thick stack of legal documents bound by a blue cover sheet. She scanned the first page, then looked up at me, a grim, sad smile on her face. "Your mother was a brilliant woman," she said softly. "She loved your father, but she wasn't blind. She knew he could be easily influenced. She worried that if anything ever happened to her, you might not be protected." She slid the top document across the table to me. It was a trust agreement. "This house," she explained, tapping the paper, "the house you grew up in, never belonged to your father, not entirely. Your mother purchased it before they were married with money she inherited from her father. She put it into a trust, the Hale Property Trust." My eyes widened as I started to understand. "The terms are very specific," Grandma continued, her voice gaining a hard edge. "Your father was granted lifetime tenancy. He could live there for free for the rest of his life on one condition: just one unbreakable condition, that he act as the sole and primary guardian for his and my daughter's child. You, within the walls of that home until you turn 25. The moment he ceased to be your guardian, the moment he failed to provide you with that home, he would be in breach of the trust. By allowing that woman to throw you out, he has nullified his right to live there. I stared at her, speechless. The air crackled with the enormity of what she was saying. My mother had foreseen this. She had built me a lifeboat years before the storm ever hit. Grandma folded her hands on the table. "So here's what we're going to do," she said, her eyes flashing with a cold fire I had never seen before. "I am the executor of this trust. I have the legal authority to remove him. But we're not going to be rash. We're going to be smart. We will get a lawyer, the best one we can find. We'll get all our ducks in a row. We will let them start digging up the garden. We will let them get the quote for their ugly patio and pick out their soulless water feature. We will give them 1 month to get comfortable in the house they think is theirs." She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, a promise of righteous fury. "We're going to let them think they've won. And then you and I are going to walk up to that front door, and you are going to hand your father the coldest, most legally binding eviction notice he has ever seen. You're going to take back your home, your mother's home." The following month was the longest and strangest of my life. I lived in my mother's old childhood bedroom at my grandmother's house, surrounded by the faint, comforting scent of lavender and old paper. By day, I was a ghost. I dropped my part-time job and focused on my online college courses, pouring all my nervous energy into essays and assignments. But my mind was never really on my schoolwork. It was 3 towns over, hovering over the house on Elm Street, imagining the destruction. Grandma was a force of nature. She found a lawyer, a sharp-as-a-tack woman named Ms. Albright, who specialized in trust and estate law. When she reviewed the documents, her eyes lit up with what could only be described as professional glee. "This is ironclad," she declared during our first meeting. "Your mother, Mr. Hale, was either a prophetess or she knew her husband's character exceptionally well. This is one of the tightest trust agreements I've ever seen." Ms. Albright handled everything. She filed the initial breach of trust notification with the courts and prepared the official eviction paperwork. The strategy, she explained, was to let them get the official notice from a process server first. It would be a shock to their system. Then, after the mandatory notice period, we would make our move. The law was entirely on our side. It was just a matter of waiting. The waiting was torture. I found myself driving past the house, parking a block away where they couldn't see my grandmother's car. The first time I did it, about a week after I'd been kicked out, I saw the landscaping truck. My stomach clenched into a painful knot. They had already done it. I watched as 2 men loaded the last of the mangled, uprooted rose bushes into the back of a wood chipper. The deep crimson petals, the ones that had perfumed my childhood summers, were being turned into mulch. I had to bite down on my fist to keep from screaming. I saw Carol directing them, a smug little smile on her face as she pointed to the now barren patch of earth under my window. My father was nowhere in sight. He was probably inside, humming his little tune, telling himself it was for the best. Each week the changes were more pronounced. A construction crew arrived and a deafening symphony of jackhammers and saws began. They tore up the lawn my mom had so lovingly cared for. They poured a massive concrete slab, a gray, lifeless wound on the earth where green grass and flowers had been. The wild, beautiful heart of the backyard was gone, replaced by the beginnings of Carol's sterile vision. My father tried to call me a few times. The first time, I saw his name on my phone and my hand trembled. A part of me, the little boy who still lived inside, wanted to answer. I wanted to hear him say it was all a mistake, that he loved me, that he was coming to get me. But I knew what I would hear: excuses, blame, justifications. I let it go to voicemail. He left a message, his voice strained and artificial. "Hey, son, it's Dad. Just Uh, calling to see how you are. Carol and I are worried. We're just hoping you're safe. Give me a call back, okay? Worried. They were worried. The hypocrisy was so thick I could have choked on it. They threw me out with nothing but the clothes on my back, and now they were worried. I deleted the message without listening to the end. I deleted the next two as well. My grandmother was my rock. She never let me wallow. She made me eat. She asked about my classes. She told me stories about my mom when she was my age, painting a picture of a woman who was not just a sainted memory, but a vibrant, funny, and fiercely intelligent person. She wouldn't want you to be broken by this, sweetheart, she told me one evening as we sat on her porch. She would want you to be strong. She would want you to fight. And so I did. I channeled my grief and my anger into resolve. I went with Grandma to every meeting with Ms. Albright. I read every document. I learned the legal jargon. I memorized the clauses of the trust my mother had so carefully constructed. This wasn't just about a house anymore. It was about honoring her. It was about justice. It was about taking back the last piece of her they were trying to erase. Finally, the day came. Ms. Albright called. "The server delivered the papers an hour ago," she said, a hint of satisfaction in her voice. "They've been officially notified. The 30-day notice period begins now. I imagine you'll be hearing from your father very soon." She was right. Not 10 minutes later, my phone rang. It was Dad. This time, I answered. "What is this?" he roared, his voice cracking with panic and fury. There was no hello, no how are you, just pure, undiluted rage. "What the hell did you do?" I stayed silent, letting him vent. "An eviction notice. Are you insane? This is my house. Carol is my wife. You're trying to make us homeless." "You made me homeless," I said, my voice quiet but as cold and steady as a frozen river. There was a stunned silence on the other end. I could hear Carol screaming in the background, incoherent words of fury. "Your grandmother put you up to this, didn't she? That bitter old woman? She always hated me," he spat. "Grandma is enforcing my mother's will," I replied, the words tasting like victory on my tongue. "The will you violated when you let your wife throw me out of my home." "It's not your home," he yelled. "You're a guest here, an ungrateful—" "Read the papers, Dad." I cut him off. "Read the trust agreement your wife was so eager to have you ignore. My mother owned that house, and now the trust she created owns it. And as the beneficiary, I get to decide who lives there, and it won't be you." I could hear him breathing heavily, the sound of his world collapsing. "Please, son," he said, his voice suddenly changing, becoming a pathetic, wheedling whine. "Don't do this. We can talk about this. You can come home. We can work it out." "You had your chance to work it out," I said. "You had your chance when you stood there and watched her scream at me. You had your chance when you let them tear up Mom's garden. It's too late." "I'm your father," he cried, his voice breaking. "A father protects his son," I said, the words sharp and final. "You chose. Now you get to live with that choice. You have 30 days. I hung up the phone. My hand was shaking, but not from fear. It was from the adrenaline, the righteous power of it all. I looked at my grandmother, who had been watching me with proud, sad eyes. She nodded slowly. "It's done," she said. The next 30 days were a barrage of desperate voicemails, texts from numbers I didn't recognize, even an email from Carol that was a bizarre mix of threats and pleas. We ignored them all, on Ms. Albright's advice. Let them sweat. Let them understand the consequences. On the final day, the 30th day, my grandmother and I got into her car. I was wearing a new shirt. My hair was neatly combed. I looked, I hoped, calm and composed. In my hand was a briefcase. It didn't contain any legal papers. Those had all been filed. It contained a single, fresh copy of the eviction notice, a symbolic final nail in the coffin. We pulled up to the curb across the street. The patio was finished. It was a monstrosity of gray stone and sharp angles. A tacky, gurgling fountain sat where Mom's roses used to be. The house looked wrong, stripped of its warmth and history. As we watched, a moving truck pulled up. 2 men got out and started carrying boxes from the house. They were leaving. We had won. A huge wave of relief washed over me. But then, I saw her. Carol came out the front door, directing the movers. She looked haggard, her face pale and drawn. She saw our car and her eyes narrowed into slits of pure hatred. Then my father came out. He looked older, defeated. He saw me in the passenger seat and just stood there on the lawn, staring. He didn't look angry anymore. He just looked broken. A part of me felt a pang of something. Pity, maybe. But then Carol walked over to him, put her arm around him, and whispered something in his ear. His expression hardened again. He nodded, then turned and walked resolutely back into the house, leaving Carol on the lawn with a strange, chilling smile on her face. She gave us one last look, a look that wasn't of defeat, but of something else, something I couldn't quite place. It made my blood run cold. "What was that about?" Grandma murmured, frowning. "I don't know," I said, a sense of deep unease settling in my stomach. "Let's go. I just want this to be over." We got out of the car and walked up the driveway. The movers were carrying out the big screen TV. As we approached the front door, it swung open. It wasn't my dad. It was a police officer, and he was holding a piece of paper. "Are you Mark Hale?" he asked, his eyes fixing on me. "Yes," I said, my heart starting to pound again. "I have a temporary restraining order for you," the officer said, his voice devoid of emotion. "You are to stay 500 feet away from this property and from Mr. David Hale and Mrs. Carol Hale, pending a court hearing." The world tilted on its axis. A restraining order? The crisp white paper in the officer's hand felt more like a weapon than a document. I stared at it, the black letters swimming before my eyes. My name. Carol's name, my father's name, lies. All of it, a tapestry of lies. On what grounds? My grandmother's voice sliced through my shock, sharp and indignant. She stepped in front of me, a small but formidable shield. The officer, a tall man with a weary face, cleared his throat. The complainant, Mrs. Carol Hale, alleges a pattern of harassment, stalking, and threats of violence. She claims to be in fear for her safety. Fear for her safety? The woman who had screamed me out of my own house? The sheer, unmitigated gall of it was breathtaking. I felt a hysterical laugh bubble up in my throat, but I choked it down. "That's absurd," Grandma snapped. "This is his house. We have an eviction order. They are the ones who are supposed to be leaving." "Ma'am, I understand you're upset," the officer said, his tone placating but firm. "But my job right now is to serve this order. It's been signed by a judge. You'll have your chance to contest it in court. The hearing is scheduled for next week. Until then, your grandson needs to leave the premises and stay away." I could see Carol watching us from the lawn, a sickeningly sweet smile of triumph on her face. She had played her final desperate card. She couldn't win on legal grounds, so she had resorted to slander, to twisting the system to buy herself more time, to inflict one final cruel wound. My father stood behind her, a ghost in his own life, his face a mask of shame. He wouldn't even look at me. There was nothing we could do. Arguing with the officer was pointless. Defying a court order was a crime. Defeated, we retreated to the car, the officer's gaze following us until we were safely inside. I watched in the rearview mirror as Carol patted my father's arm, leading him back into the house, my house, as if she had just won a great victory. The drive back to Grandma's was silent and heavy. The briefcase with the symbolic eviction notice sat on my lap, a bitter reminder of the triumph that had been snatched away at the last second. "She's a viper," Grandma finally said, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. "A poisonous, calculating viper." When we got back, the first call was to Ms. Albright. She was as outraged as we were. "It's a classic dirty tactic," she explained, her voice tight with professional anger. "Filing a frivolous TRO to stall an eviction. Judges grant them on a hair trigger to be safe, but they rarely hold up under scrutiny. She's counting on you being scared off or hoping to drag this out long enough to, I don't know, what is her end game here? That was the question, wasn't it? They couldn't stay in the house forever. The trust was law. What could she possibly hope to gain by this? The next week was a special kind of hell. We prepared for the hearing. Ms. Albright gathered our evidence. The trust documents, the eviction order, the voicemails my father had left me. I had to write a statement detailing the events of the day I was kicked out, reliving every painful word. It felt like pouring salt into a wound that refused to heal. The day of the hearing arrived, gray and drizzling, a perfect reflection of my mood. We sat on one side of the sterile courtroom, my grandmother, Ms. Albright, and me. My father and Carol sat on the other, with a slick, expensive-looking lawyer I didn't recognize. Carol was dressed in a conservative navy blue suit, her hair pulled back neatly. She looked the part of a terrified victim, occasionally dabbing at her dry eyes with a tissue. The sight of her performance made my blood boil. Her lawyer went first. He painted a picture of me as an unstable, aggressive young man, unable to cope with his mother's death and projecting his anger onto his blameless stepmother. He mentioned my erratic behavior, driving past the house, which he framed as stalking. He twisted my final cold phone call to my father into a threatening tirade. It was a masterpiece of fiction. Then Carol took the stand. She cried. She spoke in a soft, trembling voice about how I'd always resented her, how I'd called her names, how she lived in constant fear of my temper. The pinnacle of her testimony came when she described the day I was kicked out. "He was screaming," she whispered, her voice catching. "He got right in my face. His eyes were wild. He said he wished I was dead instead of his mother." He raised his hand to me. "If David hadn't been there, I don't know what he would have done." A collective gasp went through the small courtroom gallery, which was mostly filled with strangers. I shot to my feet. "That's a lie!" "Mr. Hale!" The judge's voice was like a crack of thunder. "Sit down and be silent, or I will have you removed for contempt." Ms. Albright put a restraining hand on my arm, her eyes warning me to stay calm. I sat down, my body vibrating with rage. She had lied under oath. She had looked at the judge, at my father, and committed perjury without blinking. I looked at my dad, begging him with my eyes to say something, to stop this madness. He just stared at his hands, his knuckles pale. He was going to let her lie. He was going to sit there and let her destroy my character to save his own skin. When it was our turn, Ms. Albright was brilliant. She systematically dismantled their story. She presented the trust, proving my legal right to the property. She played the voicemails, in which my father's voice was not that of a scared victim, but of an angry man who had been caught. "Mrs. Hale, Ms. Albright asked during her cross-examination, her voice deceptively gentle. "You claim my client is violent, that you're in fear for your life. Can you provide a single police report, a single text message, a single piece of evidence prior to the eviction notice being served that corroborates this fear?" Carol faltered. "Well, no. I was trying to protect him, to keep it in the family." "So your profound fear only manifested at the exact moment you realized you were going to lose your free housing?" Ms. Albright pressed. "How convenient." The judge, a stern-looking woman with sharp eyes, was looking less and less sympathetic to Carol's plight. We were winning. I could feel it. The truth was on our side. The judge dismissed the restraining order, her voice dripping with disapproval for Carol's blatant misuse of the court's time. She reaffirmed the eviction. They were ordered to vacate the premises within 48 hours. We walked out of the courtroom, and for the first time in a month, I felt like I could breathe again. It was over. Really over this time. My father and Carol scurried out a side door, avoiding us completely. 2 days later, my grandmother and I drove back to the house. The moving truck was gone. A single key was sitting on the front step, as if left there in a final, pathetic act of defiance. We walked inside. The house was empty, not just empty of furniture, but empty of everything. They had taken the appliances, the fridge, the stove, the dishwasher. They had taken the light fixtures, leaving bare wires hanging from the ceilings. They had taken the curtains, the blinds, even the smoke detectors. In my bedroom, I saw long, deep scratches gouged into the hardwood floors. In the living room, a single word was spray-painted in angry red letters across the wall, where our family photos used to hang. Ungrateful. My grandmother let out a strangled cry. This wasn't just moving out, this was a scorched earth policy. This was vindictive, petty destruction. We walked through the violated rooms in a daze. We ended up in the backyard, staring at the soulless concrete patio. The tacky fountain was gone, but they hadn't just taken it. They had smashed its base with a sledgehammer, leaving a pile of rubble. And that's when I saw it. Next to the rubble, half hidden by a discarded plastic tarp, was a small square plot of freshly turned earth. It was out of place in the middle of all the concrete and destruction. It looked deliberate. A cold dread, heavier and darker than anything I had felt before, crept up my spine. It was roughly the size of a grave. "Grandma," I whispered, my voice hoarse, "what is that?" She stared at the patch of dirt, her face draining of all color. She seemed to understand something I didn't. She walked towards it slowly, as if in a trance. She knelt down, her hand hovering over the disturbed soil, and then she began to dig with her bare hands, frantically, a terrible guttural sob escaping her lips. I was frozen for a second, my mind refusing to process the scene. My grandmother, on her knees, clawing at the dirt like a madwoman, her sobs tearing through the quiet of the vandalized backyard. Then my paralysis broke. I ran to her, grabbing her hands. "Grandma, stop! What are you doing?" Her hands were caked with mud, her nails broken. She didn't seem to hear me. She just kept digging, muttering my mother's name over and over. Laura, oh Laura. A horrible, unthinkable idea began to form in my mind. The restraining order, the scorched earth exit, the deliberate patch of turned soil. It wasn't just spite. It was a message. A final depraved act of cruelty. I knelt beside her and began to dig too, my fingers plowing through the soft, damp earth, my heart pounding a rhythm of pure dread. It didn't take long. A few inches down, my fingers brushed against something hard and metallic. I worked faster, scraping the dirt away. It was a box, a small tarnished silver box, about the size of a shoebox. Engraved on the lid, though filled with dirt, I could make out my mother's initials, LMH. My grandmother collapsed back on the concrete, a keening wail escaping her throat. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, what was inside. After my mother was cremated, my grandmother had been given the ashes in a simple, beautiful silver urn. She had wanted to keep them, but my father had insisted they be interred at a memorial garden. He'd made a big show of it, a performance of the grieving husband. Clearly that, too, had been a lie. He must have retrieved them at some point. And Carol had buried them under the rubble of her hideous fountain, an ultimate act of desecration. They hadn't just tried to erase her memory, they had tried to bury it in the most literal, hateful way possible. Holding the urn, a cold, clarifying rage settled over me. It was a rage so pure, it burned away all the grief and the pity I'd felt for my father. There were no more gray areas, no more complicated feelings. There was only a chasm between right and wrong, and they had gleefully leapt into the abyss. I helped my grandmother up. I wiped the dirt from her hands and from the silver box. "We're not letting them get away with this," I said, my voice a low growl. "This isn't over." The next morning, we were back in Miss Albright's office. When we placed the urn on her polished desk and told her the story, her professional composure finally cracked. Her face was a mask of utter revulsion. "The vandalism is a civil matter," she said. her voice shaking with anger. "We can sue them for damages, and we will. But this is a criminal offense. Desecration of remains. We are going to the police, and we are going to the press." And we did. The story was a local news sensation. Grieving son evicts father, finds mother's ashes buried in backyard. The headline was lurid, but the details were even worse. The pictures of the vandalized house, the spray-painted insult on the wall, and the story of the desecrated urn painted a picture of such monstrous cruelty that public opinion turned on them like a rabid dog. Their pathetic false narrative from the restraining order hearing was obliterated. My father and Carol had apparently fled to another state to stay with her sister, but it didn't matter. The police issued a warrant. Their faces were on the news. They were pariahs. We sued them for the damages to the house, and the judge, who had presided over the TRO hearing and remembered them well, awarded us every single penny we asked for, plus punitive damages for the emotional distress and the desecration. The amount was staggering. It would cripple them financially for the rest of their lives. We learned from Ms. Albright that my father, in a panic, had drained his retirement accounts to pay for their legal fees and their escape. Now, what little he had left would be garnished to pay us for the damage he and his wife had caused. They were left with nothing. No home, no money, and no dignity. But for me, it wasn't about the money. Over the next few months, my grandmother and I worked to heal the house. We hired contractors to repair the floors, repaint the walls, and install new fixtures. We chose everything together. It was a slow, expensive process, but every fixed scratch and every fresh coat of paint felt like we were cleansing the house of Carol's toxic presence. The hardest part was the backyard. The concrete patio was an ugly scar. I hired the same company that had installed it to come back with jackhammers and tear it all out. It was the loudest, most beautiful noise I had ever heard. When they were done and the bare earth was exposed to the sun again, I felt a sense of peace. My grandmother and I went to the nursery together. We bought rich, dark soil and bags of compost. And we bought a rose bush, a deep crimson variety called Mr. Lincoln. I planted it myself, right under my bedroom window in the exact spot my mother's had been. As I patted the soil down around its base, I placed my mother's urn beside it. This would be her true memorial garden, not some cold, impersonal plot, but here, in the heart of the home she had loved and protected for me, even after she was gone. Life slowly found a new normal. The house, once a source of so much pain, became my sanctuary again. My grandmother stayed with me often, filling the quiet rooms with the smell of her baking and stories of the past. The ghost of Carol's presence faded, replaced by the loving, resilient spirit of my mother, which seemed to live in the walls, in the garden, in the light that streamed through the windows. One evening, about a year later, I was sitting on the newly built wooden deck, breathing in the sweet perfume of the blooming roses. My phone buzzed. It was an unknown number, but I answered out of curiosity. "Mark?" The voice was weak, hesitant. It was my father. I said nothing. I know you don't want to hear from me," he stammered, "and I don't blame you. Carol, she left me 6 months ago, took what little money we had left. I'm working at a gas station, living in a motel." He paused, and I could hear the ragged sound of his breathing. I wanted to say I'm sorry. For everything. I was weak. I was a coward. I let her poison everything. I lost my wife, I lost my home, and I lost my son. I lost everything that mattered because I was too afraid to stand up. I listened to his pathetic confession, and I felt nothing. No anger, no pity, just a vast, empty distance. He was a stranger to me now, a ghost from a life I no longer lived. "I know it's too late," he finished, his voice cracking. "I know I can't fix it. I had to tell you. Goodbye, son." He hung up. I stood there for a long time looking at the crimson roses glowing in the twilight. He was right. It was too late. He had made his choice that morning in the garden. But my mother had made a choice too. A choice to protect me, to provide for me, to love me beyond the veil of life and death. And in the end, it was her choice that had mattered. Her love had been the foundation, and on that foundation, I had rebuilt my life. The house was quiet, the air was sweet, and for the first time in a very long time, I was truly home.